Welcome, faithful, back to the world of tomorrow as we continue our exploration of the factions in the Corvus Belli game Infinity. Today we're going to tackle my personal favorite, right, and kind of the hardest one for me to explain, which is Haqqislam. This is a galaxy-spanning nation, a patchwork of worldviews, theology, practices that are an evolution of the Islamic traditions of our world today. And this society and its citizens and its achievements and businesses might have some loose, ancestral ties to the religion we know as Islam today, but it is vastly different to the religion in our current world. And I want to put that up front. Nothing in this video will be a critique or an explanation of modern Islamic culture or worship. I respect people's beliefs, and I expect y'all do the same in the comments down below. With that being said, what is this faction that we call Haqqislam, and how did it get here? Well, we actually have a pretty firm understanding of its origins, and it all began with a teacher named Farhad Kadivar, a man who described himself as a messenger. He didn't want to be seen as a prophet, a religious leader, or a cult leader, of course. And while much is known about his doctrine, his teachings and beliefs, very little is known about the man himself. We do know that Kadivar was a man of incredibly deep conviction. He looked around the world, particularly the Middle East of the 21st century, or at least towards the end of it, and was really disgusted by the corruption of the government and religious leaders of the time. The endless back and forth of warfare amongst other religions and sects. And his idea fundamentally was a simple one, is that, you know what, another world is possible. We don't have to keep doing this. To Farhad, the modern Islamic state and culture had deviated so far from the teachings of the Quran. And only by stripping all the artifice, right, the religious ceremony and its ties to government and all those things, and all these bolted on rules that religion kind of tacks on over hundreds and hundreds of years, can followers achieve another golden age of Islam. If you didn't know, back in the day, think Crusade times, Islamic nations had incredible, what they call literally the golden age of Islam, which is just beaming with technological advancements and societal advancements, things like that. This message, to strip away all the artifice of religion and just get back to the core teaching of the Quran and kind of incorporate that into life, it is fundamentally a humanist worldview about making the world better and easing suffering. But, like all things, making that very simple idea happen was extremely difficult. Now, at this point, Farhad had followers, and this type of thinking was spreading like a virus, because people in this part of the world were so tired of the fighting and the corruption and the religious establishment of the day, and they wanted to show the world that they could be a global power without sacrificing their souls, meaning their religion, their spirituality, like the West had done. Now, straight up, those are some very lofty goals, right? Think about this, right? The world flocks to that region for their oil, but they want to change that. Become master innovators, philosophers, and take their place on the world stage because their God says they can. And do all of that by stripping away their religious nature, which has been around for centuries. Right? Become a global power that isn't just like the oil place where all the oil is. No, they want to achieve that because they have this new renaissance of the human mind starting there. It's very ambitious, this idea of you're turning a religion into a worldview and a cultural identity based on excellence and humanism. And the effects would dramatically change the political and society climates of the Middle East. It would cause the religious establishment that is so ingrained into government and tradition to start to change and falter. Because try to imagine the inverse of this, right? Like flip it and reverse it. So like in America, like I'm an American, and there are experiences and a worldview that are founded by that. But what if we started moving in a direction where Americanism became a state religion complete with ritual and theocracy and more, right? That's the inverse of it. It's a huge change. So getting back to the origin story, the movement had very, very humble beginnings, right? But the messenger was humble and patient, able to speak to people of all levels of society. And slowly but surely, things began to change. Haqqislam actually means New Islam and was born, and its rise was very slow. That is, until a terrorist attack ended the life of the messenger, Farhad Kardivar. In that moment, he became a martyr, and people rose up in masses, tired of the fanaticism, the hate, the radicalization, and the tyranny. The time for change had come. And this coalition of believers, rich and poor, far and wide, sought a new place to carve their beliefs into stone. But there's a problem. There's nowhere to go. All these people have shared beliefs and ideologies, but there's no country that's like, here, have this huge piece of land that's, really good for you and I wasn't going to use anyway. At this point in the timeline, mankind has already reached the stars, right? Pan-Oceania had already successfully developed a stable colony, and Yujing was either on its way to doing so or already done so. So the wealthier minds of the Haqqislam movement pulled their resources together, and they reached out to the crumbling US. They hired NASA, which was darn near debunked right now, and to actually hired them to find a stable wormhole for them to travel through. But there's a whole lot of sky to search, and so this is going to be taking a lot of time. Tradition dictated that the Prophet, meaning Muhammad, would lead the way, and so telescopes were pointed along the path where it's traditionally believed that Muhammad had ascended and stepped towards heaven. Following the path into the night sky, a wormhole was revealed. And through that wormhole, a planet. And things kind of yada yada here just a little bit, but in short, this planet was named Bourak. And while it did require some terraforming to make it inhabitable, it became the perfect home for the Haqqislam people. A place where their ideologies could flourish and be taken to their fullest expression. And this is really the point where it's fully divorced from the religious movement, right? Once they have their own space and they're not competing with what I'm going to call traditional or modern Islam, it really is no longer a religious thing whatsoever. And that's kind of the character they are in Infinity. Because we're moving away from their origin story and really talking about, what is the Haqqislam that we interact with in the game. Their lineage is super important to their cultural identity, however, it doesn't define them in a religious way. So with this new worldview based on humanism and the space to practice their beliefs, this renaissance of culture took place. Art, philosophy, science, and above all, medicine were explored to their fullest. And when I talk about medicine, I cannot stress enough how much this has charted the course of Haqqislam. And I'm not just talking routine medicine or surgical procedures, although those are developments that were, at the forefront of technology there. But genetic enhancements, neural interfaces, bionics, and most importantly, silk. Silk is the ace in the hole that keeps Haqqislam from ever losing their place on the world stage, or I should say the galactic stage now that we're a spacefaring race. Imagine a material or a device that was able to basically download your mind and would allow you to essentially put into replicated bodies or bionic bodies. Essentially, they have the market on immortality. It is a costly and time-consuming process, so it's generally reserved for the highest tiers of society, but it exists nonetheless. And no one produces and trades silk anywhere near the level of the Haqqислamites. Now, that's enough to solidify any power base. I mean, really, that is the consumer market. That's everything that people want to throw money at. The only thing you can't buy is more time, and they're selling it. But Haqqislam excels at even more. They are masters of trade. Haggling is a big part of their cultural system. This includes things like exploration, making and forming trade routes, and low-cost transportation is a big one. All these things like Pan-Oceania and Yujing, they're luxury class transportation from amongst the stars, but Haqqislam has the market on consumer-grade transportation, just stuffing people in a ship and taking them everywhere they need to go. It's much cheaper, much, much more popular. They also own, or at least regulate, most of the trading posts or refill stations, that kind of stuff amongst the stars, and so they can really govern the ports of call, if you will, across the galaxy. Now, this does make them a pretty standard, like, second-tier power, right? Super important and influential. That they have the thing that everybody wants, meaning immortality, and they have a way to turn it into a product, right, that can be sold. However, they don't have the manpower or the intense corporate interest to spread it across the galaxy, kind of like Yujing and Pano have. They definitely are that second tier of power, but they are an important part of the greater Infinity universe. And so I want to back off now and talk about why is Haqqislam cool? Why did I choose these guys? If you didn't know, when I said in the beginning that this is my favorite army, it's because it's mine. Like, I chose this faction when I jumped into the game, and that is, I love the idea of them evolving, but not losing an identity, right? They have this religious text, the Quran, and basically at some point someone said, I think we're looking at this wrong, and this whole movement changed, and it's like, let's push away from, we'll call it the toxic parts of humanity and religion, and move to a way where it's like, why don't we just get at the core good principles that are in this text, and from that extrapolate, like, we can make the world a better place, and we can help each other, and we can ease suffering, and do all these really cool things. It's very complex, but and messy, frankly, but I like it because honestly, it feels more real than a lot of sci-fi things where it's like strange cults develop and you're like, how would that really start? You know, when you look at other like sci-fi properties, but this is just an evolution on an already existing belief system, just as the belief systems we have today are an evolution on things that came before it. I really like their focus on medicine and trade as being their dominant powers because they're not combat based, right? It's not the, I think, what do they call it in 40K, like bolter porn, where it's just like people shooting at each other, the best guns, the biggest guns. This is a very reasonable, like, if you had to have the market on anything, this is a really good one because people are always going to get sick and they're always going to get hurt. And then when you dominate trade, the sheer amount of business that is constantly happening at any given moment when you have a galaxy-spanning empire is intense. So they're like I said, they're a second-tier power, but they have their tendrils into some of the most fundamental parts of humanity, which means they're not going anywhere. They may not be the pioneers or the richest, but they are firmly, like third place, if you will. And the last little thing here, and this is more talking about the game, is that they are a very infantry-based army. So I mentioned before that, the Quran and that kind of stuff, their interpretations of it really do focus a lot on humanism and medicine and that kind of stuff. And so when you're playing the game Infinity, this is brought to the tabletop by the fact that they don't have access to a lot of intense tech equipment, but they do have the best medics in the game, and you can bring a lot of soldiers for very, very cheap. I'm still waiting for them to get rules for Code 1, or I'm going to wait until the new edition comes out to play them again, especially with everything going on in the world today. But what I will say is that I find them to be an extremely interesting culture because, it's one of those things like, just to kind of give you a peek behind the curtain, I try to stay away from topics like religion and sexuality and all those kinds of stuff because, I want to be respectful, and I certainly don't want to put a video out that, invites a conversation that I can't really quite monitor in a good way, or I guess kind of keep it on the level, keep it respectful. But this is an interesting one where it's like divorcing themselves from hundreds and hundreds of years of tradition and then taking the best principles of their belief system and applying that to a thoroughly modern world where they want to be the innovators of intense technology, but for the sake of these very, very, cherished principles and ideologies. I find that fascinating, and I think it is really, really cool. So friends, thank you so much for talking about Haqqislam with me and letting me just rant for a little bit and gush, because I think it is a really cool faction. Let me know in the comments down below, what faction for Infinity would you like to know about next? Because I do believe, if I haven't done it already, I think ALF is the one big one that I have left, but remind me if there's something else. Thank you so much for spending time with me, and I hope to see you in my next Infinity lore video. Thank you so much for watching and listening. Happy wargaming. Hey everybody, I hope you enjoyed that video. It was made possible by the folks over here to the left. These are my top supporters over here on YouTube and on Patreon that keep this channel going. If you'd like to learn more about how to become a supporter and get some cool things in the process, like exclusive pictures and interactions with me and get your questions answered here on the channel, go ahead and click any of the links down below or the join button on the community page over on YouTube. Regardless of your choice, I wanted to thank you so much for joining me with this video, and I look forward to seeing you in my next one. Happy wargaming.